Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy. How many times have you taken that very special moment to try to get some answers to why we're here? How did we get here? Think about the possibilities of tying in science with, of course, spirituality. In a moment, Dr. Bruce Lipton joins us. He is a cell biologist, but he looks at things with a different eye. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. Dr. Bruce Lipton with us for the next 3 hours. Dr. Lipton is a cell biologist, a lecturer, internationally recognized leader, folks, in bridging science and spirit. He was on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, later performed groundbreaking stem cell research at Stanford University. He is a best-selling author as well. Some of his books, The Honeymoon Effect, Spontaneous Evolution, The Biology of Belief as well. And here he is, Dr. Bruce Lipton, back on Coast to Coast. Hey, Bruce, good to have you back.
George, I am so delighted. Thank you so very much for this invitation, and I just really want to thank you to give an opportunity to me to speak to this wonderful audience you've created over the years, because those are the cultural creatives, the people looking outside the box for the answers they're not finding inside.
Absolutely.
So, I'm glad to be here for that.
How'd you enjoy Santa Cruz?
I love Santa Cruz. I've met so many recovering scientists. I couldn't believe how many people like myself that were in university systems and then stepped outside because the answers are really not to be found in there. And to find them all down there was such a treasure, and I appreciate you being there.
It was a great time. The people there were just so into everything, Bruce, that we were doing, and the weather was magnificent, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, this is one of the reasons why I moved this far west, to get out there and to find this community, because it really is a community that is the new thinking, the new ideas are coming from here, and I so appreciate being here with them.
They love you out there. My gosh.
I'm a hometown boy.
You are. I thought for a moment that, they were going to bring you in, with in some kind of rickshaw or something with people carrying you, throwing rose petals at your feet as you came in. Well,
yeah, they're a fun town. That's why we're here.
They sure are. There are so many things I want to talk with you about, because it isn't very often we get an opportunity to talk with a scientist who also has your belief system. Let's go back way before you became Bruce Lipton, the scientist. What were your beliefs when you were in your 20s, let's say?
Well, by then I'd already played with the concept that there was something called spirituality and there was something called science. And by the time I was 10 years old, I'd already heard from so many spiritual people. They say all those wonderful words of wisdom and all that. And then even in my child's eyes, I could see that their lives never match anything that they talk about. And so I really lost interest in that, and I went into science and then got programmed into the science, which was the belief that, life is just a accidental series of genetic mutations that led to this human body, and we're here by accident and enjoy it, and then that's it. And that's where I was in the 20s.
Did you have a quest to try to figure out why you're here, how you got here? Is there a God?
If it was, it surely wasn't conscious at any one level. I was so much into the cells. First time I saw cells in a microscope in grade school, I was just mesmerized to see these little moving organisms like amoebas, paramecia, moving around, and realizing that they weren't bouncing around like a pinball in a machine. They were like looking over here, then they moved over here, and they were over there, and so they were on purpose. And in my child's eye, I thought, oh my God, they're just like little people living in this other miniature world. And from that moment on, it led me to my graduate work, which ended up being an electron microscopist, and going through cells into the molecular structure of them, and living in there for a time, and just taking in all the wisdom I could from the cells, which was really cool because I didn't start out, as you said, with what's my mission. I started out asking, show me something.
Exactly.
And what it showed me was a new world and a new life, and I'm just so excited because my book that I wrote about it, that was out, it's in its 10th year, and it's still selling like it did in the first year because more and more people are waking up to see that there's a new biology. And this new biology brings in things that you mentioned that I didn't even know were there until the cells revealed it to me, things such as immortality, spirituality, mind over genes, all this other stuff. Is like, oh, my God, I was an avid student, and 10 years of this book. And what was exciting is that Hay House asked me how about revise and update the book for a 10th anniversary? I said, okay, and I read the book. I hadn't read it for years. And the joy of it was, oh, my God, I got to the end of the book. I said, no, I'm not changing a word in the original text. All the science in 10 years has fully endorsed everything that was in that book. So I just added a bunch of new things to it.
Yeah.
But I'm real excited because a vision so long ago is now becoming mainstream science.
Would you consider yourself today more of a spiritualist or a scientist?
I'd like to not separate those two.
I'm trying to trick you.
Well, I'm a spiritual scientist now. I mean, it was for me. It was I was not looking for spirituality. So that, first of all, that was the biggest shock of my whole life. I mean, I was looking at an understanding of the mechanism of how the cell worked, and when understanding the structure of the skin of the cell membrane, it's a computer chip, actually. It's a carbon-based computer chip. And what I saw was, oh, my God, the structure and function of that membrane revealed that our identity is not found inside the cell. Our identity, what makes each of us different, is represented by an environmental signal that is picked up by special proteins like miniature television antennas on the surfaces of our cells. So no two people have the same set of these antennas. It's like a combination lock of it's receiving identity frequencies from the field. What was the point? That our identities are picked up from the field and played through the cell through these receptors. And what, instantaneously is like, oh, my God, I realized it's like, well, if the cell dies, the signal in the field is always a signal in the field. It's there until a future cell with the same set of receptors shows back up.
I love that.
And then that broadcast will be playing through a new body. But the whole idea about it is the broadcast is immortal, and we are the broadcast. And it was like that moment I just looked at it, I said, wait, I'm not in here. And it was, oh, my God. And it wasn't like, okay, Bruce, how many years of devotion did it take to, fall into being spiritual? And it's like, well, how about a minute or maybe 45 seconds or something like that? Because it was a mechanism. And it was just as clear as 2 + 2 is 4. It's like, oh, my God, identity is picked up by antennas on the surface of the cell from signals in the environment. And it was like, wow, that blew my mind, but it changed everything, and it's real interesting, George, and all of us have this feeling inside of us. It's not always conscious, but it's running every day, all day long. There's something built into all biological organisms called the biological imperative. And I said, well, what's that? I said, well, it's the drive to stay alive. And I go, well, what does that mean? I said, well, even an organism as primitive as a bacterium will not sit there and say, okay, kill me. If you try to kill a bacterium, it's going to do everything it can to stay alive. So every organism, from the most primitive bacterium up through humans and above, every organism has this drive to stay alive. And what does that mean? It means that we are on guard every moment with our unconscious mind, observing the world, looking for what? Things that threaten us.
Yeah. That's right.
And the reason is obviously because we grow up to know that we're mortal and we got to watch out. And so there's this on guard all the time, looking at everything, looking everywhere, not keeping your conscious mind, involved with it until it sees something, but it's working all the time. So what happened? The moment I recognized I'm not in here, I'm an immortal being, a broadcast, a spirit that plays through this mechanism, I felt this enlightening, George. I mean, it was just a lightening of my body, a lightening of my life. What was it? The fear of death slipped away. The first time in my life, fear of death just like gone. And what happened? Freedom. It was the most exciting freedom.
Very refreshing, wasn't it?
Oh, my God. I mean, for a guy who was zero spirituality and A and B, not looking even for it, then to stumble on it was like, oh, my God. It's funny. It was so emotional an experience to understand the mechanism of how the cell worked that I've been an academician. I worked from my head 40 years. Everything's from my brain. The moment this understanding came in about how cells work in spirituality, it wasn't my brain that really affected that. It was my heart. And all of a sudden, I remember at that moment of understanding, tears were coming down my eyes. I was choked up, and I realized I was so choked up because my heart, and I now refer to this as my heart orgasm, the first time I felt that experience. And really what it was that a truth that was so deep came in. And my life changed.
It's got to be profound, Bruce. Once that hits you, the way it hit you and so many other people, I hope, get to that stage, it's got to be a profound feeling, isn't it?
Oh, you can't put it in any description that I could try to make that will relay the emotional content of touching a truth of the universe. And is it a truth? Well, look, I understood this. This was really back by 1980. I started getting all this, and every bit of science since 1980 is fully substantiated all of that original finding. So to me, it's like, oh wow, I saw this. You know, it was kind of fun. There was a funny response because there was this moment. I was like, okay, I'm not a spiritual person. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, spirit exists. And then I was in this little quandary. It's like, I asked myself, well, you know, why have a spirit and a body? Why not just be the spirit? And I could feel the answer welling up through my cells. Apparently, I must have Jewish cells because I asked the question, why have both? And the answer came in the form of a question. And the question is like very funny but very profound. I said, why have both a spirit and a body? Why not just be a spirit? And the answer from 50 trillion cells was simply this: Bruce, if you're just a spirit, what does chocolate taste like?
You know, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And you could equate that with a lot of things on this planet.
Well, that's the whole point of it. We have a nervous system that responds to sensory input. And I go, well, that's really nice, but guess what? The signals that bring the identity into the body are the same receptors that forward the message back to source again. So that when you taste something, you see something, you hear something, you smell something, when you feel something like love or fear, those are sensory perceptions that are translated by the nervous system into vibration. So a picture that you see with your eyes is actually a bunch of vibrations that go to the brain, or a taste of chocolate is a bunch of vibrations that go to the brain. I go, well, they go to the brain, but guess what? We also now know that those signals that come into the brain that we sense are not locked in our head. And I say this because there's interesting science, and it's based on, well, everyone's familiar with EEG, electroencephalograph. You put wires on a person's skull, and you can read the electrical activity of the brain because the electrical activity is conducted to the skin, and the wires pick it up, and you can read brain function. I go, yeah, great. But there's a new technology, and it's called not electroencephalograph, it's called magnetoencephalograph. So it reads magnetic fields. What's interesting? The probe does not touch your head. The probe is outside of your
outside of your skull, isn't it? Yeah.
Outside of your skull. Has no connection to your body at all. And what are you doing? You're reading your brain function. And all of a sudden, so what does it mean? There's only one simple understanding. Your thoughts are not contained in your head. Your thoughts are broadcast out into the field. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, my God, this is this two-way street that we're sort of like a simple way to put it is we're like a Mars rover in this regard. Essentially, let's say I want to know what Mars is like, but I can't get there. But I really want to know what a human experience of Mars would be. So I send up this rover, and it looks like a fancy go-kart and all that kind of stuff. And I say, yeah, but no matter what it looks like, guess what it is? It's the equivalent of a human. It has eyes to see with. It's got taste receptors to sample the soil.
It's got wheels like legs.
It's got move around. It does everything. But guess what? So the guy at NASA sends a signal, drives the rover around, but the rover, meanwhile, is picking up with all its sensory apparatus information about what it's like to be, all the the experiences of living on Mars, and sends it back to the guy at NASA via the same antenna. I'm going, and this is the cool part, we are like Earth rovers. We came here, we jump into this virtual reality suit with our antennas, we're connected to this suit, and whatever the suit experiences, that information is translated into vibration, which is then sent back to source. So we came here for these experiences. And then, of course, since just like the rover, there's a driver, it moves the vehicle around, so it's not random. We came here on a mission as Earth rovers to experience life. And what's so exciting about it is that a lot of people think, okay, you're dead, then if you have a good life, you can go to heaven. I'd like to suggest something that's totally cosmically weird and different, and that is, no. You were born into heaven. You were born to be here to do what? Take that consciousness that spirit represents, but turn it into a device that moves around on the planet, can do things, and can take the experiences and send it back. So we came here for experiences. And unfortunately, we've been hijacked. So
yeah, that's true.
I say, well, this is heaven, and you look around and go, it sure don't look like it. I go, well, that's because we've been hijacked. We've been programmed to lose our mission, and we lost it. And but it's available for us to come back and recognize this was heaven. This is where we came to create. This is great.
I have always wondered with remote viewers how they are able to, and I practice it too now, but how they were able to remote view things, past and present, by being outside of their body. Their minds would go out and literally become their eyes and see things in the future or see things from the past. And it's much like what you're saying. It's like everything is outside of the human body. It's this tapping into this wireless internet out there, Bruce, that allows you to do this.
It's the field, and when you can tap into the field, that's where people's intuitions come from. If you can tap into it and let go of your Earth-based moment and get out for a moment, you can come back with all this amazing information. It's all out there. But we've been programmed not to see it. We've been programmed to go away from it. We've been programmed not to pay attention to our biology, in a sense. It's an amazing turnabout for this biology, because what should be heaven, for most people, this is a hell of a life for a lot of people. And yet we have this great opportunity. So an interesting point about it is the movie The Matrix. When you go into a video store, say, where do I find The Matrix? And they say, oh, it's in science fiction. I go, no, you know what? It's a documentary.
Well said.
We have been programmed, and it's interesting because when people have had an opportunity. Most people have taken the red pill at one time or another in their life, and it had a profound impact when they took the red pill. And you say, well, when was that? And I say, science has recognized is that when we fall in love.
Bruce, we're going to come back with you in just a moment, talk more about all your work and the power of consciousness on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, we're back with Dr. Bruce Lipton. His website, by the way, linked up at coasttocoastam.com, is brucelipton.com, as we talk about his works, the honeymoon effect, spontaneous evolution, the biology of belief as well. Bruce, have you continued that quest of trying to decide and find out why are we here, or have you passed that and gone on to something else?
Well, as I was leaving off, I really think is because we came here to create, and we came with a mission. And I think what we're really trying to see is an evolution that's in process right now, so that it's all coming together. And it's kind of interesting because as this evolution is in process, we're also seeing the termination of the current civilization, which is required to make room for this new evolution that we're on the threshold of right now. So when we look around at the world and see all the crises, and we can focus on each individual crisis and talk about each individual one, it really is one overall big crisis that covers all of them, and that is that we are not sustainable and that we're facing our own extinction, and it really requires us to make an evolutionary jump at this time. And so, well, a lot of people are looking out and, of course, rightfully feeling fear and anxiety about the future of what's happening here and seeing all the trouble. I look at it in a very different way. It's like, this is very exciting because this is the birth pain of creating a new civilization. We're ending an existing civilization and moving into a new civilization. And again, this is why I so appreciate your audience, because they fully represent cultural creatives in this movement.
When you have talked about the basics of biology of belief, explain that.
Well, okay, as I started out in my non-spiritual form, I was a conventional biologist, and I was looking at the nature of cell mechanics and mechanisms. I was focusing on cells ever since my elementary school days, and what I was working on was what controls the fate of a cell. Well, of course, at the same time I was doing this research, I was teaching students that genes control life, because that's my program too. I got programmed, genes control life, and we always talk about things like genes turning on and off, and genes actually determining our fate in life. And I'm teaching that, and then in my laboratory, and this is back 48 years ago, I was cloning stem cells. And all of us have stem cells. Another name for stem cell, more accurate one, would be embryonic cell. That's what it is. But after you're born, before you're born, I can say that's an embryonic cell. After you're born, I can't call it an embryonic cell. You're not an embryo. We changed the name. It's called stem cell. You say, so why do I have stem cells in my body? And the answer then turns out is that every day we lose hundreds of billions of our cells die every day. Normal, just that's aging, normal attrition. I mean, the entire lining of the digestive tract, 1 trillion cells, is replaced about every 3 days. So there's a massive amount of turnover, and you have to replace these cells. So you're always growing, if you think about it, because you're always dying every day, and every day you're growing and replacing all the cells, and they come from stem cells. So as I was teaching that genes were controlling life, I was cloning stem cells back then, and that meant I took one stem cell, put it in a petri dish by itself. It divides every 10 or 12 hours. After a week, I have about 50,000 cells in the petri dish, but the most important fact is they're all genetically identical because they came from the same parent. Now I say, yeah, but what was the experiment? And here's what the experiment was. I take the cells from that main dish and split them into 3 dishes, so I have genetically identical cells in 3 different dishes, but I change the culture medium, the environment in which the cells live, by changing the chemistry a little bit in each dish. In one dish, the cells form muscle. In the second dish, the cells form bone. And in the third dish, the cells form fat cells, each in these different environments. And then you come down with the most fundamental questions. Well, what controls the fate of the cells? And the first thing is, they were all genetically identical. So the first thing, you can't say genes did this. What did it was the environment. It was the culture medium composition. And you go, well, okay, that's a nice experiment with cells in a plastic dish. And then I say, okay, now let's take a giant step here and recognize this, is that when you look in the mirror, George, you see yourself as a single human being. I go, well, that is true in one sense and a misperception in another sense, in that you're not a single entity. You're made out of 50 trillion cells. The cells are the living entity. Me, you, anybody listening on this call right now, when you say your name, that's a name that represents 50 trillion sentient cells living in a community. So the joke, in a sense, is a human being is a skin-covered petri dish. 50 trillion cells in it. And I go, well, what's the culture medium? Well, blood, because when I make culture medium in the lab, I try to replicate the composition of the blood from the animal from which I get the cells. So I grow rat cells. I use rat blood, try to make culture medium using that composition. Grow human cells. I use human blood. So I said, well, what's the point? And here it comes down to simply this, is the fate of the cells was not controlled by genes. It was controlled by the information in the environment, which was the culture medium. And I go, okay, then it doesn't make a difference if the cell is in a plastic dish or a skin-covered dish. Its fate is being controlled by the culture medium, the composition of the blood. And then you say, oh, okay, in the lab, I manufacture the culture medium. And I say, yeah, but in your body, who's in charge of making the culture medium, the composition? I go, well, the brain does that. And then I say, yeah, but what chemistry should the brain use in making the blood? And I go, it's based on the mind. So in other words, if you open your eyes and you see someone you love and your mind gets in the interpretation of love, it releases these wonderful chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, vasopressin, growth hormone. It releases these hormones into the blood, which is the culture medium, and those signals control the genetics and the fate of our cells. And just to show you what happens if you open your eyes and you see somebody out there that threatens you, you release completely different chemistry. You change the composition of the culture medium. Now you add stress hormones and inflammatory agents to the culture medium, and it has a different fate. Point? The fate of the cells is not controlled by genes. It's controlled by the environment, which is the blood, which is in turn controlled by our perceptions and our beliefs and our attitudes. Change your belief, you change the chemistry.
I was going to say, can you change a cell by thinking something?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's an interesting, just how intensely focused this is if I could hypnotize you, George, and I say, I'm going to touch you with a burning cigarette on your arm, and I just touch you with my finger. But your subconscious hypnosis state, you see it, you perceive it as a cigarette or a burn.
Right. So I bolt back.
You bolt back, and guess what? Within a couple of minutes, you're going to have a blister. I said, well, how could you get a blister? You didn't get burned. It's like, yeah, but the mind overrides the body. So when the mind interpreted the burn, it knew where you got touched. It knows where you are. And where you got touched, it will then generate a complete blister response only because of the mind's perception that that's what happened. And all of a sudden, you realize, oh, my God, the simple truth is that less than 1% of disease on this planet is related to genetics. The other 99% of disease is lifestyle and belief.
I am perplexed by the human being, and let me take out the God part of this.
Yes.
But, here we are as humans on this planet. We need eyes to see. We have them. We need ears to hear our environment and to communicate. We have those. We have a mouth to eat, to speak. We have that. It's an amazing mechanism, this body of ours. Why has our environment, how did this get created? I mean, how is it so smart, Bruce, that it creates the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, for everything we need to communicate, to exist? How did it know how to do that?
Well, it's so wonderfully interesting that cells are intelligent. We have to recognize this, number one. Cells are intelligent. As humans, we have the hubris of anything less than human. It's not so intelligent. It's less intelligent. And as you go down a few steps, a few animals down, then you go, oh, what about the intelligence of a starfish? It's like, huh? A snail, a worm. And I go, what about the intelligence of a cell? And so here's the beautiful part. We have to stand back and recognize this. This human body that we inhabit was created by cells. Cells got together in a community and put this thing together. And so basically we have to recognize cellular intelligence is amazing. And cells, as I've studied them and have learned now, they are always evolving by reading environmental signals and then adjusting their biology and their genetics to complement the signals. It's interesting is, as I said, only 1% of disease is related to the genes. 99% is from lifestyle and beliefs. And the important part about this is 90-some% of us come with perfect set of genes. the ill health that we have is not the body's problem. It's our perceptions and our beliefs, because that is what ultimately controls those genes. And let's go back to the cellular intelligence part. Then I said, as cells started to evolve, they started to come together in communities, and then the communities had an architecture, and you might say, okay, where the heck did that architecture come from with all this design? And then comes this beautiful little insight from mathematics, and that is that the nature, physical nature, is built on a fractal geometry. You go, what does that mean? It says that the structures at any level of the organization, from the atoms to the molecules to the cells to the people to humanity, all share the same patterns. And that's how come, as a cell biologist, when I do research on cells, it applies to human health issues. Why? Because the functions of the cells are the same functions as in a human. Cells see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. But when they came together in community, they partitioned out the functions and then created individual groups of cells that would take on the function of seeing. A cell can see. It's got a receptor that reads photons of light. And so when the light's on, the cells know about it. So I say, well, when you put 1 trillion cells together, you can put, hundreds of thousands, millions of cells, and just say, look, your cells, you take that specialized function of catching light, and then create a structure that catches the whole range of the spectrum. And it's just more and more cells, just emphasizing what any individual cell can do. So this intelligence is built in. Then you might say, well, okay, so where does the structure come from? And this is exciting. This is Genesis. And it goes like this. Imagine before life was on this planet, the planet was inorganic chemistry, rock, salt, minerals, crystals. And I say, and where did life come from? I say, life comes from the beam of the sun hitting the surface of the earth, and essentially etches the surface where the beam hits it. And it turns that inorganic chemistry into organic chemistry, which is the life form. So I go, well, this is really cool. I'm creating life by taking light from Father Sky and combining it with inorganic chemistry from Mother Earth, and that enlightened chemistry becomes organic chemistry and the basis of life. And you go, well, that's really nice and cool and all that, but where's the point? And the point I'm trying to get, George, is that it's an etching where the sun hits the surface. That's why there's a greener belt around the equator than there is at the poles, because there's more etching at that point. You go, so, and I go, computer scientists, because etching is used to make computer chips and all kinds of new electronics, one of the questions is what happens at the interface where an etching beam hits the surface that it etches? And through an analysis and a scientific pursuit of understanding what happens, the computer scientists came up with an interesting fact. At the interface where a beam etches the surface, there's the spontaneous formation of a fractal geometry. And all of a sudden, it's, oh my God, that's the interface where the organic chemistry is being created as these mobile particles compared to the inorganic chemistry. And what? They're in a field, and they complement the field. So it's interesting. The shape of things on this planet are predetermined in a sense by an energy field. And then evolution takes place as the particles that are being etched over time accommodate the geometry of the field and manifest a fractal nature. So it's interesting that that there's like a creation and an evolution at a simultaneous experience. That the field, the fractal geometry field, is an energy field which shapes things, and then the creation of the particles represent the matter that then can conform to the field, and in the process of conforming, that matter expresses what is called evolution. So there was a creation and an evolution simultaneously going on, which hopefully will stop the argument between the two polarized sides that really don't like each other. The fact is, consider that both occurred at the same time.
Bruce, you mention a lot in your works the work of the late Cleve Baxter.
Yes.
Just a great guy. Used to work with the CIA, and then he went into testing plants with a polygraph system of his, and he was able to prove that plants have emotion, maybe extrasensory perception. Just incredible work. What do you think of that?
Well, this is one of the most interesting aspects is that every organism has awareness. It's also aware of other organisms that have awareness. And there's a tendency for a lower organism to key into a higher organism and read off of that because the higher organism has more awareness to it. And so that all organisms are connected to each other. They're all connected by vibration because this is quantum mechanics. It basically, what we perceive of things as physical matter in a quantum universe, when you take that atom apart that makes up things, it's only vortices of energy. So that all of the energy is connected, whether it's a plant form or an animal form or whatever it is. Energy is life, and this becomes very important in the understanding because when we have energy, we've got life. We run out of energy, we run out of life. And so the first level of communication of the most primitive organism all the way up to the top organism now, the first level of communication is vibration because it represents energy. And the significance about that is when energy interacts in the field, it becomes what is called entangled. And energy waves, which are just like waves on the sea, when they come together, the waves can enhance each other or cancel each other out. It's called when two waves come together and the resulting interaction leads to a bigger wave. That's called constructive interference. It's constructing. But for most of us, I say, well, you experience that in your life, but it's called good vibes. And I say, and sometimes two waves come together and they cancel each other out. They go flat, and that's called destructive interference, but it's also called bad vibes. I say, well, why is this a primary communication? The answer is energy is equal to life. When you're in a place of good vibes, your biology is telling you, okay, you're in a place that enhances your life. You have more energy. If you find yourself feeling weak or flat or loss of energy, which we refer to as bad vibes, what is it saying? It's saying where you are in the environment, the energy doesn't support your vitality, that reading this is like, get out of this area, because why is this important? Because you don't have to teach animals, okay, this is a good thing or this is a bad thing, and don't go here and don't go there. Animals know. How do they know? They just read the vibes. If the vibes are good, that's where they go, and if the vibes are bad, they go away from that.
Yeah.
And so this is the primal communication that holds it together. So plants read vibes, animals read vibes. When and this is what when you have a pet dog, for example, they're classic. What do they learn as puppies? They learn to read your vibes, the owner's vibes.
Yeah, and they're very good. Bruce, stay with us. We're going to come back. We're already at the top of the hour. We'll pick up where we left off. Plus, I want to get into some of your other works, The Honeymoon Effect, incredible work there, too. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.